everyone, welcome to another extra episode of our random talks in the Star Trek series. Today we will talk about women in Star Trek, and my guest today is Zellick. Well guys, let me introduce you to my guest. Hello Eve.
Hi.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm alright, you?
Yeah, I'm fine too. First question, the first time you're here on my podcast, how big of a Star Trek fan are you?
Star Trek is life.
Good girl! Me too. Okay. Now today we are going to talk about women in Star Trek. Is there any female character you like and you really like to talk about?
Believe it or not, my favorite female character on Star Trek is one who a lot of people are going to laugh at, but Loaxana Troy.
Interesting. I must say, in the beginning, yes, she irritated me, but at the end, I started liking her.
Yeah, I think in the beginning, they didn't quite know what to do with her, maybe, but
Yeah.
By the time we saw her later, especially in Deep Space Nine, there was way more to her than we ever thought there was.
Yeah, exactly.
Like her relationship with Odo, they had a real love for each other that was different than the one that he shared with Kira.
Yeah, exactly. If we are talking about the, I don't want to say hot female characters that there is in Star Trek, but there are a few women that are very known for their consistency in the episodes, but also as a female character in Star Trek.
Yeah.
What would you say if we are starting with TOS? Of course, you got Uhura.
Yeah.
And Yeoman Rand. And we got, of course, number one.
And Nurse Chapel.
And Nurse Chapel, of course. Is there anything you would say they would have a big... yes, they are in kind of a way like a background, if I can say it like that. But in being a supportive role, they are very big because I think they have a lot more to say and to show us than what the men characters do.
Yeah.
So what is your opinion about the female characters we have in Star Trek itself? This may be a captain or not a captain, but do you think the female have in one way a big role, not only a supporting role, but a big role in as their characters?
I think it's becoming more and more of a bigger role, because in the beginning we pretty much saw two types of female characters. We saw like your ones who were more in like the nurturing, caring roles, like Dr. Crusher, Loxana Troy, Deanna Troy, those ones. You saw that kind of role. But then you saw the extreme opposites, like the Tasha Yars, the Kira Nerys, the real tough, I hate to say it, but ball breakers. So we had that. I think now we're moving more towards having a little bit more range with the female characters. So it's not they're either these hard, bitter, cold women, but they're not these like soft, delicate, mothering types. We're seeing a lot more of the female characters where they're just, there isn't the extreme differences, which makes more sense because in life there's not everyone is one way or another way. Some people have both sets of characteristics. And so I think what they're doing with the newer Treks, like even with number one and the new incarnation of Uhura, those ones, they're getting a chance now to show the women as having more depth of character. They're less two-dimensional and a little more three-dimensional.
Yeah. And I think also more diversity in the character itself. Like you said in the beginning, if we are looking at TOS and TNG, it's almost all of them are nurturing, or it's nurturing, or it is the badass side of being security or whatever. And Captain Janeway is the first female captain we have. Although that is not entirely true, but okay.
The first one we see, anyway.
Yeah, where the series is all about a female captain. Do you think if we see and compare, for example, her with Burnham, is there a kind of a difference in being a female captain?
There is quite a difference between them, because in Janeway's case, I mean, she's a very no-nonsense captain. You know, she really does try to stick to her ideals, but at the end of the day, she is a very no-nonsense captain that's, you know, she's in command, she's capable, but we don't really see a lot of her as a person. We only really see her as a captain. Whereas with Burnham, we're seeing both sides of it, both her as Burnham the person and Burnham the captain. So I've seen people complain that she's too emotional or this or that. But the thing is, you know, we don't normally see the captain's lives. I think the first captain where we saw a lot of his life was Picard. And I think that had a lot to do with the actor who was playing him, because for Patrick Stewart, he can carry off that role of, on one hand, being the captain we all look up to, but on the other hand, he's, you know, got a personal side too. Whereas most of the other captains, we don't see that. And so with Burnham, we're seeing it, whereas Janeway, we couldn't get that chance because they kind of set her apart from everyone else, whereas Burnham is right in the middle of her crew.
Don't you think that they have learned about it since Janeway, as being having a female captain?
I think they've learned a lot, at least as far as the writing and stuff goes, to change it. Because I know even some people weren't fond of Janeway as a captain when she was first introduced. Especially because we had this whole thing of, again, like with a lot of female characters, even though they were there and they were considered equal, a lot of them were still portrayed as very sexy and very, like, you know, we had the cat suits and we had, you know, poor Seven of Nine being sewed into her costume.
Oh, she hated that cat suit.
Yeah.
I remember I remember that when she did an interview, and she said everyone was asking her about the cat suit, and she said, "Well, I hate the cat suit, and that was the first thing I burned when we stopped with Voyager." One was very funny.
Yeah, but I think it's kind of sad that they felt they had to do that with her just to like up the sex appeal of the show for the men, because that says at that point, and I mean Voyager's late 90s, early 2000s, it says at that point we still needed women to be sexy in sci-fi, you know, because people don't really talk about liking Janeway, but you know, how many, you know, men and some women for that matter, you know, drool all over Seven of Nine.
Still happens.
Yeah. So whereas we're seeing ones like Burnham and Georgiou and to go mirror universe, Captain Killy, and it's the opposite. There is no portrayal of them being sexy or, you know, because Kira's intendant in the mirror universe was portrayed as being very sexy and almost, you know, she was almost a nymphomaniac, but
yeah, indeed she was.
But we're not seeing that so much now. We're seeing women where they don't have to be sexy to be seen as capable and seen as a character we can, you know, be drawn to. Because I know a lot of people like Georgiou, and there's nothing sexy about the way that outfit looks.
No,
and
but
you know, she's
in all the talent what they made.
Yeah. And, you know, Captain Killy, you know, another one, she's not sexy, and yet they fear her.
Yeah. But there's also with Georgiou.
Yeah. Yeah, and Georgiou, it's funny because I know a lot of actually male fans who actually find Giorgio more attractive at this point than Seven of Nine, because there's something about that tough woman who really doesn't care.
I
And
think that
she
is
kind of
all in the Terror and the Mirror universe. If we are looking at the women in that period, you see a very opposite of woman than you would see in the Prime universe.
I think it's because with the Terran universe too, just the way things turned out, the women would have had to be different, because we see some different portrayals there, like the Mirror universe where Captain Kirk's time, the women were really more decoration, the captain's woman. And so sure, she's got the shadow power behind the captain, but she's still subservient to him. And yet in Enterprise, we then see like the shyest, quietest person, which is Hoshi, becomes the Empress of the Terran Empire. And who saw that coming? Because it's really not.
Yeah.
So I think the women in the Mirror universe definitely had to evolve more differently than they did in the Prime universe.
Yeah, indeed. Another great female character, I think, is T'Pol.
Okay.
And I think she is, in that way, very interesting. If you are looking in the timeline, and I think she have made a tremendous grow in Enterprise. First, she was just totally, well, in that way superior and had the knowledge and was Vulcan, but in the end we saw her loosen up and more human, if we can say. Also, she did, by the way, have, I think, some kind of a catsuit on. What we know. What is it with men and catsuits?
I don't know. Maybe we should put the men in a catsuit and high heels and see how they like it.
Oh, that would be funny, yeah.
I don't understand it. It's not comfortable.
No! And that is the same with things like wearing a bra or whatever. And the funny thing is, they asked me that why do you wear a bra like this? And that was sorry guys, that is totally off topic, but I'm still going to tell you. There was a great picture on Facebook with female lingerie, and they said, well, this is what men want us to wear. And the picture next to it was a old underwear, men boxers. Totally worn off and etc. And then they say, well, this is what you guys wear for us, but we want to see something beautiful too. So it was very funny. I was thinking, typical men-female sexes of the battle in a way. But we can see that also in the beginning of Star Trek, is that there's still that very differences between female and men. Is there any way you would say, okay, now we have the new tracks, they are putting it a little bit equally?
I think so. Because we're obviously seeing less division between men and women now that we've got characters that are like non-binary, such as Adira Tall and Gray. And I could be getting that wrong on the non-binary, but I'm pretty sure one of them is supposed to be non-binary. So we're seeing some of that where, it doesn't really matter as much where the characters are male and female. And I mean, there was even references to that going back in Next Generation. There was that planet where everybody was a neutral gender. And then that one person, falls for Riker, causing a bit of an issue there. And so, I mean, we did have mention of that kind of thing. And then, like I say, we've got the new characters where they're non-binary, or, transgender, or sometimes multiple genders. So, and I think that's going to be a more realistic representation of the world going forward. Because when you think about it, even in Discovery, there's some interbreeding between races. In Strange New Worlds, there's some interbreeding between races. And the thing is, we know, like, say, Andorians have 4 different genders. And there's also a race in Enterprise where they have 3 genders. There's the male, the female, and the cogenitor, which is the episode where, once again, Trip sticks his foot in it. But, we had things like that. We've seen a man get pregnant in Star Trek, these kind of things. So I think over time it's going to become less important, whether somebody's male or female, and it's going to come down to just them as the person. Because, I mean, nobody even makes a big deal about it on Discovery. I think the one time Stamets gives the wrong pronoun to Adira. Adira's just like they. I've never been she. And they just kind of go forward from there. And I thought the choice of using an LGBT character played by an LGBT actor to mispronoun was kind of interesting, because it's not what you'd expect.
Yeah, exactly. Now I lost my question.
That's okay.
There's one person that's also very interesting, and I had a talk with somebody about it in my last episode, and that's Guinan. How do you see Guinan in the whole Star Trek family?
In a way, I see, well, because we really only see Guinan in The Next Generation, and we don't know very much about her people, because the only other times we see her race is once on Deep Space Nine, and it's a con man. And then, of course, there's Dr. Soren in Generations. But I almost think of Guinan as like Q. She's kind of watching, kind of a watcher for Picard specifically.
Isn't she a watcher too?
Yeah. She is there's the watcher in Picard, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think of her as being I think of it as almost like Picard has 2 people watching him and 2 people trying to nudge him. One is Q, who basically just grabs him and drops him wherever he feels like it, or drags him kicking and screaming. The other's Guinan, who's more like, she'll show him, she'll give him threads, she'll give him a map, but he has to walk the path. And so I think that she kind of takes a little bit of a mentoring role to him, because, I mean, at the end of the day, who captains the captain, who mentors the mentor? Even he needs somebody to go to for advice. And in a way, I think Guinan filled in a gap as like a ship's counselor without being a ship's counselor. Because you could, like with Troy, she was a professional counselor. You go to her for grief counseling, or Lieutenant Barclay with his issues, things like that. But when people just had general, like, human to human problems, or were dealing with a personal issue, they weren't going to Troy, they were going to Guinan. And I think that also goes back to the whole concept of people tell their bartender everything.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, how many people go to the bar and they unload on the poor bartender every time?
Exactly. Yeah.
So even Scotty ends up getting some advice from Guinan when he's on the ship.
Yeah. If we are looking through the whole Star Trek and female characters, is there a character that you will say, okay, this is a very important character where I would like to talk about?
That's a hard list to narrow down, because there's a lot of them when you think about it.
Spill the beans!
Okay, I would say, I lost my train of thought now. I gotta love having ADHD. who was it? They're just on the tip of my tongue too. And
Which series?
Deep Space Nine. I was gonna say, weirdly enough, another one that's well, she was started as a secondary character but became a main character, Lita the Dabo girl.
Okay.
But the reason being, I mean, she works in this profession where, let's face it, Dabo girls are kind of like our modern day version of girls who work in like a Hooters or like a strip club or something. You know, you see Quark and the other Ferengi treating her and the Dabo girls like pieces of meat or eye candy. And the Dabo girls are said to have a reputation and stuff like that. They make this big deal about them. And yet she's the one who really challenges Rom to grow as a person. You know, she challenges his sexist ideas about women. She challenges his ideas about, you know, being a Ferengi. And she, you know, she comes from this different world where she's the exploited and his people are typically the exploiters. And yet somehow between the two of them, they build each other up because she convinces Rom, you know, he can be an engineer, he can do great things because she learned that she can be more than just a Dabo girl. You know, she's smarter than just to stand there and look pretty and spin the wheel. But she's, to me, she was one of the more interesting characters because we don't really see them otherwise. The Dabo girls are just a faceless thing. They're kind of like Orion slave girls. They don't really have a point. And then we see this one who goes, and she's literally with one of the most misogynistic races in the whole Federation. Well, the Ferengi aren't Federation, but she's with one of the most misogynistic races. And yet the two of them really do work together because, you know, they come together, they come to an understanding. You know, Rom is willing to give up all his money just to prove he loves her. And not just give it up, but give it up to a cause that matters to her because, of course, her people, the Bajorans, were at war for so long, and so he gives it all to the orphans fund and everything, you know. So I like the fact that the two of them grow, but they grew together and they were constantly challenging each other, and so in that sense they made a really good pair. And then the other one would be probably Keiko O'Brien, because I know she gets a lot of hate from fans, but as somebody who is married, I can say her and Miles, it's actually a good depiction of what a marriage could look like in the future, where one partner is assigned to starships and things, and the other one has a job that they might have to give up to support their partner's career. And seeing the dynamic between Keiko and Miles, especially over Deep Space Nine, to me was nice because we got to see what a marriage would look like in the future, and a working marriage.
I don't think it's not even for in the future. It's nowadays as well. Because if you don't work on a relationship, the relationship will fail.
Yeah, and I mean, people have a thing with the fact that they argue. Well, all couples argue, you know. They struggle when they have the babies because people do struggle when they have their babies, you know. And for myself, I teach a lot of students whose parents come from other countries. And I have seen and talked to some of the parents who have had to give up their career in order for their families to be successful when they come to Canada. But the parents do it out of love for the family and love for the kid. And so seeing Keiko having to deal with that, you know, she gives up her career for O'Brien for quite some time. You know, it was interesting to see them play that out because it wasn't a marriage like we see on TV where the dad's a doofus and the mom is a shrew. This is a couple that's really trying to navigate, you know, being married during a war and being pulled apart and brought back together. So I kind of like seeing those women where they're supporting, but their men are supporting them too.
Yeah, indeed. It is I think it's once again in the vision of Gene Roddenberry that Star Trek also brings lessons in the episodes, and Miles O'Brien and Keiko is a big example for that. There is another secondary character of Deep Space Nine that is coming to mind, and that is what's her name? Captain Yates. Oh,
Cassidy.
Cassidy, yeah. Um, what do you think her role as in supporting Cisco?
Her and Cisco kind of have an interesting relationship, especially because he had to turn her in that one time. But what I like about the two of them, because of course it was Jake who introduced them, but what I like about the two of them is they're both extremely independent people. Um, Cisco has had to be very independent because he had the death of his wife. He's having to raise his son on his own. He was sent to what's supposed to be a backwater posting just to get rid of him, and ends up becoming a religious icon and in the center of a war and everything else. So he's got these huge responsibilities, and he's got this life he never could have envisioned. And it requires him to be independent. It requires him to be decisive, and it often requires him to have to sacrifice a lot. But then we see Cassidy, and I mean, a freighter pilot, she sacrifices stability. She sacrifices time from her eventual husband. She, as a freighter pilot, she, like Cisco, makes tough choices that sometimes may or may not be the right choices. But at the end of the day, he also respects that she's capable and respects her independence. So I think for them, they were really more of a partnership first. Not to say they didn't love each other, because they obviously did, but I think they were really a partnership first. And it was a case of they both walked into that marriage with their eyes open. Otherwise, she would not have been able to, handle him leaving at the very end, where he has to be with the prophets. She mentions a few times being uncomfortable with the fact that he's a religious icon. And especially as he's coming to believe that he really is this religious icon. But at the same time, when he needs to do those duties, she knows to step back. She knows that this is just something he has to do. So she supports it. She doesn't try and stand in his way. So I think in a way, she was a really good choice of a partner for him. And again, theirs was a relationship that wasn't perfect. I mean, you see Cisco navigating the waters as a widow and a widow with a son. You see Cassidy, who's having to come into this knowing what would have happened to Cisco's previous wife, knowing that she's getting an adult son out of the deal. So I think theirs was a more mature.
A package deal?
Yeah. Package deal, yeah. So I think theirs was more of like I say, more of a mature thing, where there was a lot of compatibility and a lot of seriousness first, and then everything else grew over top. Whereas Miles and Keiko, it was the whole love first and then the partnership grew. Whereas Cisco and Yates was definitely partnership first, which makes sense because a war captain is not going to be out there looking for romance. And a freighter pilot who's used to being alone isn't either.
And we also see that, for example, in Voyager. I remember an interview with Kate Mulgrew that she said, I don't want the captain involved in a romance, for example, with Chakotay or with...
Yep.
And later on, of course, she had that holodeck character. In one way, I would love to see her falling in love, because it's a daily life thing, and in one way she was that strict and strong captain, but in the other hand, I would say, why wouldn't you show emotions? Because also she is human. She's not a Borg.
Yeah, I remember Harry Kim says something along those lines when he mentions they should invite her to Tom's holodeck recreation of the pool hall, and Tom is asking him, well, why? And he's like, well, she's always by herself. And he goes, well, she's the captain. And he goes, well, we might have to think of this differently now that we're out here, because even the captain needs people too.
Yeah, exactly.
So. And I do like that they did hint at the odd relationship potential here and there, at least, because it meant that she wasn't totally cold to the idea. It was just, she was very she was duty first in a way. She's like Kirk. She's married to her ship first, and everything else is secondary. Because I mean, there was that little bit of will they, won't they with Chakotay, but they both realized too that that was a really bad idea. You know, there was the holodeck character. There was that one alien who ended up using her in Counterpoint. But so at least they had the option open there. So at least we know, okay, yeah, she still has this desire, but for her, she just doesn't have a practical way of going about it. So she's duty first. And then, of course, I mean, the one who courted her the most was Q, but that was something else. And I have to admit, I do like the fact that, you know, they have Q as being enamored with her the whole time, and she's just absolutely can't stand him, doesn't want nothing to do with him.
I love that episode. So we have talked about the good woman in Star Trek, but let's talk about the villain woman in Star Trek. So, of course, I think the biggest one and the well-known one is the Borg Queen.
Yeah.
So, what's your thoughts about?
Well, we have two different actresses who play the Borg Queen, so we get two different slightly takes on the Borg Queen. Because in the Next Generation, and I mentioned this a couple weeks ago on Dan's podcast, but we have the Next Generation Borg Queen, Alice Krige, and she has the sinister, the manipulative side of things, but she's also extremely seductive, which again is totally an 80s, 90s thing, that we need even the bad woman to be sexy and seductive. And at least, I mean, in her case, the form-fitting exosuit makes sense because she's mostly just mechanical. But, you know, she tries to seduce Picard. She tries to seduce Data. She uses that kind of aspect to pull people in. But in Voyager, we have the other actress playing her, and she plays her as not seductive, but more like a capable and decisive yet cunning woman, just like Janeway, who's a capable and decisive and cunning woman, you know, and she's more practical, I think, there, because the Borg Queen of Picard's time would not have made an alliance, but the Borg Queen of Janeway's time realizes sometimes things need to change. Things are a little bit less black and white. So, yeah. But I mean, she is a great villain, and because while she does have that sexy, sexed up, you know, side of her, and she targets predominantly male characters, you know, at the same time, she wouldn't hesitate to snap them in half like a toothpick if it suits her. And, you know, she's firmly in control of everything, all her drones, everything else. And she's extremely capable. So, I mean, she makes a great villain in that sense, because at the time, too, most of our main villains on TV were still males. So to have a female, which fits the insect aspect of Borg, because insects are always ruled by a queen, and the Borg more than once are likened to being like a hive of bees, a hive mind. So, you know, the fact that it would be a queen in charge makes sense. But I'm kind of glad they're moving away from the sexy Borg queen, because, you know, it's kind of nice to see that we don't need to have that tied to any major female character just to make them sellable. Yeah. You know, but yeah, she's one that she comes on the screen, and both actresses, you just know, like, that's trouble. It's like when in Star Wars, when you see Darth Vader for the first time coming on board the Rebel ship, you don't even need to know who he is. You just know that something's going to happen, you know. Yeah. And I think it's, you know, they do a good job of making the Borg Queen a 3D villain, considering the Borg army itself is very two-dimensional. You know, they're just relentless. They just come. Kind of like the Jem'Hadar and the female founder. Yeah. You've got the female founder who's in charge. She's in control. She's managing everything. She is far from sexy, too. And then, but you've got the Jem'Hadar who, like the Borg, are just relentless. They just keep coming. They don't think for themselves. They just do as they're told. Yeah, no, I actually do think the Borg Queen was one of the best villains. And I mean, she is definitely one of the most memorable ones in that they've kept bringing her back. Even in Picard, we see another tie into the Borg Queen. And now we've got Agnes Jurati as part of the Borg Collective, is almost another Borg Queen. So I think the Borg Queen is going to be one of those villains that hopefully they keep bringing back, because she's, every science fiction universe needs a good villain that you can keep bringing back, that keeps you on your toes. Like in Doctor Who, we've got the Daleks and the Cybermen, they, no matter how many doctors we get, they always come back. We've had the Borg.
Yeah.
We've had the Borg show up in Picard. We've had the Borg show up in The Next Generation, in Voyager. We've had them show up in Enterprise because of First Contact, the sphere that crashed. So I'm hoping we continue to see more of them. And maybe it would be nice to find out a little bit more about the Borg Queen and how she's generated in the first place.
Yeah, but that is an interesting thought as well. When you look at in Picard, when Agnes became the Borg Queen, I think there were a few episodes before that when Seven plugged herself in and became temporarily the Borg Queen. The Borg Queen's because Elnor thought that she's becoming the Borg Queen as now, and the Borg Queen answered that Annika, or Seven, still had a job to do, so she won't be a Borg Queen for now. So maybe that's the whole sequence also in writing with the Borg Queen, that she already knew that because that is the weird thing, and of course that's the stupid thing of time traveling shenanigans. In Picard, we see also that there was already a Borg Queen, and not the Borg Queen we know.
No, it's a different one.
So they're leaving gaps in the storyline of Borg, and they need to write that carefully, I guess.
I think so. And the Queen saying Seven still has a job to do kind of does make sense, because we know in Voyager she was in the Queen's inner circle kind of thing. If the Queen had that, like, she was literally part of the Queen's group of drones on the Queen's ship. She was like one of her right-hand Borgs, I guess you could say, if they had that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So because her treatment of Seven of Nine in a way is almost like a mother to a daughter.
Yeah. I think
it's in a kind of a creepy way, but
yeah. And I think that that's what they show us through whole Star Trek with Seven and the Borg Queen. It's always like, also she is in her alcove regenerating, and the Borg Queen is talking to her. You see that there's still a close connection, although they are hundreds of thousands of light years away.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in a way, we kind of see that sort of connection play out again later between the Mirror Empress Georgiou and the Prime-verse Michael Burnham, because in the Mirrorverse, Michael Burnham was her daughter, and it becomes a thing where it's almost like she takes on the role of becoming mother to Michael Burnham all over again when she's in our universe. So I thought that was kind of, I don't know if that was a deliberate parallel, but that's what it reminded me of, was that you have Borg Queens to Seven, and you have Mirror Georgiou to Prime Burnham. It's a similar thing. Yeah, and there's some betrayal there on both sides too. Like both sides have betrayal. Both sides have kind of, one minute they're working together, the next minute they're busy, stabbing each other in the back. So
yeah. So we talked about them a little bit. Is there another villain you like to recall?
I'd have to say another good one, and I think most people would agree, the Duras sisters.
Oh yes.
Honestly, the most unforgettable Klingons, except for maybe Grilka, which she wasn't a bad person, but yeah, the Duras
And she
sisters,
married
and
Quark.
I know her and Quark, and then she comes back later, and Worf can't understand why she would have been married to him. But
Yeah.
her and Quark actually do work quite well, weirdly enough.
Oh, I love that
But
episode. It's so
but
funny.
totally the Duras sisters, because I mean, we see the Duras family meddling all the way back in Enterprise because Duras is a main villain for Archer. But seeing how the Duras sisters manipulate and scheme, and you know, as well, on one hand, female warriors are equal to male warriors. There is still a little bit of sexism in the Klingon Empire, in that women still don't have certain abilities, like Grilka not being able to have her own house and things like that. So to see the Duras sisters come along, and they basically stomp all over the men, they stomp all over the High Council, they do whatever they want, right up to getting pregnant and everything else. And they kidnap Geordi and use his visor. So we see some very unusually non-Klingon behavior in a way, because Klingons tend not to be into being subtle or subterfuge. Klingons are pretty much, they would rather show up and be right in your face so you know who's coming for you. So they kind of gave another side to Klingons that we don't normally see, like how, if a Klingon is dishonorable, how dishonorable can they get? And the depths
Exactly,
that
yeah.
those two are willing to go to. But again, there is the problem that they were also portrayed as being sexy, which took away from it a little bit, because I mean, their outfits were deliberately designed with the cutout to show just how ample they were blessed, and they do actually try to be a little bit seductive in the way they approach some of the men. So in that sense, I think they kind of did him a little disservice, but otherwise they're great villains. You see Lursa and B'Etor on the screen, it's going to be a good episode, because anything to do with the House of Duras is a good episode. And seeing
Yeah.
them, just seeing them kind of buck a few trends among the Klingons is kind of neat too, because you can't, it would have, in a warrior race, you'd have to have some women who'd be like, no, we're not going to do this just because the men think so.
Mm. But that would also be a typical Klingon thought, or yeah, what how you can say it, behavior for Klingons.
Yeah. But yeah, I have to say I really enjoyed them. And then the other major female villain would be Kai Wynn.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, you can't talk about the bad women without Kai Wynn, because I know when I first watched Deep Space Nine, it was already in reruns because I was a child. So it was in reruns, and I remember the first time I saw her on screen and I saw her face and everything, I'm like, something's up with that woman, and I know I don't like her, and I don't even know why yet, but I know I'm not going to like her. And the dynamic between her and Major Kira was just amazing, and her and Captain Sisko, because she knows that both of them see right through her nonsense and through her BS, pardon my French, but they see right through her, but they have different ways of dealing with her. Kira's very in her face, carrying on. Sisko, on the other hand, basically plays her game of manipulation, but better than she does. And seeing how far she would go, to killing Vedic, trying to kill Vedic Bareil, to trying to, kill other people. And then her final ending at the hands of Dukat and the Pa Wraiths. I have to admit, I was laughing when she fell for Dukat in disguise, because to me, that was the best karmic moment of all. She was so focused on a different enemy that she couldn't even see the enemy in front of her. And she ends up literally sleeping with the enemy and doesn't even know it. And I like the idea that in a society that's religiously based, that there could still be corruption of that level. And I mean, in our world, we see that parallel too. Like, there's been a fair bit of corruption that's come out about, the Vatican and the Catholic Church and some of the things they've done around the world, especially here where I'm in Canada. We've got that whole tie into the residential school system and some of the bad things that have happened here. But we've always seen those abuses as being perpetrated by men in that position. So it's kind of interesting in Deep Space Nine that it's a woman perpetrating the abuses, and it's a woman perpetrating all the problems in a religious order. So I kind of like that side of it too, that they flipped it. It's not the men that are the problem, it's the women. Well, in this case, one woman specifically.
Yeah. And maybe that is just Star Trek's vision to show us what happened in the Vatican, in a way.
Yeah, I have to wonder, because a lot of her behaviors is like that, and a lot of the things she says and does. And then you see but at the same time, just like in any organized religion, there's good people like Vedic Bareil, for instance, in theirs, who really wants what's best for the people, and his heart's really in the right place, and he really does have a good sense of his own faith. But unfortunately, his own niceness is kind of what leads a little bit to his downfall.
Yeah.
And then we see sort of a parallel between him and Pike in that he gets to see his death before he dies, and he knows it's coming, but he proceeds anyway, just like Pike gets to see his death before it's coming, but he proceeds anyway. So there's a lot of parallels there too.
Yeah, indeed, there is. If I ask you, and this is my last question because we are running out of time, if I ask you your top five female characters.
Top five, Lwaxana Troi is first, for sure. I would say Lieutenant Uhura, but it would be a tie between the original actress and Celia Gooding on Strange New Worlds, because we're getting more of a background to Uhura there. So I'd say them. I've got to say Georgiou. Both Mir and Prime Georgiou, hands down, she is amazing. I would also have to say, believe it or not, Commander Dax. And I'm going to cheat and do for 4 and 5, it would be both Commander Dax and Ensign Dax. I believe she's Ensign when she comes back. Both, because I liked seeing both sides of the Dax character there.
Okay.
So, and I kind of like the fact that she's, we see her as Dax, Lieutenant Dax, or Commander Dax is, capable. She's sure of herself. She knows things. She's wise beyond her years. And then we see all that washed away when she becomes Ezri. And she's totally a fish out of water. So just, seeing like that with Uhura, now we've seen more of Uhura and her skills and her capabilities, but she's a fish out of water versus when we first saw her and she was capable and confident. So
yeah.
But Lwaxana is number one for sure. Because she was just unapologetically herself, but all underneath it, she had the biggest heart. And I mean, Odo's speech to her at their fake wedding, said everything, that she just accepts everybody as they are. It doesn't matter.
And in one way, she helped him too. I remember that she helped him because in the way of he slept in that little cup.
The bucket.
The bucket, yeah. And she helped him to come out of it and have some furniture in his quarters, etc. So in one way, and that's thing I love about Lwaxana is, yes, she can be feisty and direct, but she also can have that nurturing way that you. And she did that also with Alexander, Worf's son.
Yes. Yeah,
so,
she didn't. She was so good with Alexander, and I. It's kind of funny that she would step into that role because, I mean, most of Next Generation, they have her as a man-crazy, man-chasing woman. But even underneath that, if you look at it, she obviously lost Deanna's father at a young age. Like, she obviously was widowed earlier on than she expected. You know, she lost her one child, Kestra, and she, in a way, she lost Deanna because Deanna and her don't have that a close relationship, and Deanna's in Starfleet and sees her mom as being ridiculous. So, you know, seeing the fact that even though she's got so much love that she's freely handing out, that the biggest thing she craves is somebody to partner with and love her in return. You know, I think that's more what's being said there rather than she's just a man hungry, you know, cougar on the prowl. And I remember seeing a quote about her character that apparently when Gene wrote the character, he told Majel, "Hey, I've got a role for you and you don't even have to act." So to me, that's interesting because having never only seen her once or twice in the odd interview, it's interesting to think that the character of Loxana was probably based on the real life Majel Barrett Roddenberry.
Yeah. Yeah, I had that part of the interview too. Yeah, so yeah, it's very interesting also that he actually wrote that role for her in, yeah, like you said. Well, you don't have to act because it's written for you as like a glove that you put on.
Yeah, and even there was even times she even saved the Enterprise, like with those ambassadors that were had to sleep in the coma while she was on board. And then just as she's leaving the ship, she tells him flat out they're not ambassadors, they're there to assassinate the person. You know, there's a few times where she turns around and she just saves the ship, saves the day.
Yeah.
But she does it, and the thing is, she doesn't even want recognition. She just kind of throws it out there like, you know, here you go.
Yeah. Do with it what you want. I think we are coming in the end. Thank you very much, Eve. It was really lovely to talk with you. And I hope to talk to you soon.
Yes, for sure.
Dear listeners, thank you for listening and join me next time for a new extra episode in the Star Trek series of Orinda Talks. You can listen and subscribe to Orinda Talks on the YouTube channel or join the Facebook group. If you'd like to comment or talk with me about this episode, you can reach out on the Facebook group or the YouTube channel. I also like to tell you about my two other podcasts called Girls Talking Trek and Orinda's Books Club, Smooth Jazz, Tea and Books. Girls Talking Trek. Together with my lovely co-host Amanda Hopper, we recap every 2 weeks an episode of Star Trek TNG. All the episodes will be recapped in chronically following. We will approach each episode with humor and a feminine look. Girls Talking Trek is also to listen, follow and subscribe on Anchor, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, or on all the other podcast providers. We also have a Facebook group and a YouTube channel. Every 10th episode will be live streaming and a video episode, so you can talk live with us and see our face expression of us talking about the episode. Orange's Book Club, Smooth Jazz, Tea and Books is a podcast that will discuss books of all genres. You can discuss this with me on the YouTube channel or the Facebook group. There will be book reading events with live discussions. Of course, you can also give me recommendation what I can read. My perfect picture while reading a book is in front of the fireplace, loads of tea and smooth jazz in the background. So join me, read with me and discuss with me the books we are reading. I will see you next time.